BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Tuesday, and on Tuesdays I've been talking to you guys about the story of JonBenet Ramsey, perhaps the most famous unsolved mystery in American history. And in this episode, I will be revisiting Bill McReynolds as a suspect in her murder. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the story of JonBenet Ramsey. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Now, some of you might be wondering, didn't you talk about Bill McReynolds last week? And the answer was yes. I did an interview with Dr. Casbah, where he outlined the theory for his suspect in the murder of JonBenet, Bill McReynolds being the perpetrator. But I noticed that there were a lot of comments in the section down below where you guys were saying that you thought that he wasn't making the most convincing points. And Dr. Casbah will join us later on in the episode to give a final point on the murder of JonBenet because it is one of his original finds. But I also thought we could look at some of the more conventional narratives regarding Bill McReynolds as a suspect in her murder. Of course, on December 26 of 1996, JonBenet was found in the basement of her Boulder, Colorado home, which she shared with her mother, father, and brother, Burke Ramsey. Whatever happened to her the night before is still part of the mystery. One of the people who has become a suspect in her murder and has been widely discussed over the last 30 years has been Bill McReynolds. He was the man who played Santa Claus at JonBenet's Christmas party, and he also worked as the mall Santa. But of course, Bill McReynolds had a very illustrious career. He was a professor of journalism in Colorado, and he also was heavily involved in academics, also studying history. But to outline the theories involving Bill McReynolds, let's look at some of the major points. And I'm going to do a very, very brief recap from last week's episode. Firstly, he had access to the Ramsey home. Secondarily, he told JonBenet that she was going to get a special visit or present from Santa after Christmas. That's after Christmas, not on Christmas. And JonBenet was, of course, murdered on Christmas night. Santa Claus committing a murder on Christmas night. Was there some type of symbolic setup? And also, he had given JonBenet a suspicious vial of gold glitter, which seemed to bother people for some particular reason because they couldn't comprehend the motive for the gift. Not to mention that he would have known about how to enter the home, how to hide in the basement, because he had been given a tour of the home during the Christmas parties, plural. Bill McReynolds had played Santa at the Ramsey's Christmas party more than once. But there's an article that has been written about this on Bustle by Caitlin Flynn, and this actually came out for the 20th anniversary, and it really, really goes to show just how much time can fly, because it seems like it was just the other day when it was the 20th anniversary of JonBenet's murder, and now we are approaching the 30th anniversary. Bustle.com, just citing the source. One of America's most famous unsolved cases is undoubtedly the murder of JonBenet Ramsey in Boulder, Colorado, and CBS has released a special called The Case of JonBenet Ramsey for the 20th anniversary. Police investigated a variety of individuals in relation to JonBenet Ramsey's murder, including Bill McReynolds, though McReynolds died in 2002. He was always maintaining his innocence and was cleared of any involvement in her death. In June of 1997, the Denver Post shared an article about a number of people who knew that JonBenet spoke to the outlet about what she was like as a person, because the 6-year-old murder victim was far more than a pageant star whose glamour shots had been splashed all across the media. Bill McReynolds was described as the man who was hired by Patsy to play Santa Claus at the Ramsey's Christmas parties. He did this in 1995 and 1996. Bill McReynolds told the Denver Post that he first met JonBenet in 1995, and he was struck by her smile, her pensive, almost retiring demeanor, and her angelic glow. Bill McReynolds also stated that JonBenet had given him a vial of gold glitter at both the 1995 and 1996 parties. So excuse me if I said that backwards, that JonBenet received it from Bill McReynolds. This states that he had received it from her. And Bill McReynolds wants to describe this a little bit more. The stardust was all that I took with me for good luck when I had heart surgery last summer. Her murder was harder on me than my operation. She made a very profound change in me. I felt very close to that little girl. I don't really have any other children that I have that special relationship with, not even my own children or my own grandchildren. Well, I mean, if you want to make yourself look suspicious, I mean, that's one way to do it. You have a closer relationship with JonBenet than you did with your own children or grandchildren. When I die, I'm going to be cremated, and I've asked my wife to mix the stardust JonBenet gave me with my ashes. We're going to go up behind the cabin here and have it blown away. And Bill McReynolds passed away in 2002. He died in Mashpee, Massachusetts, which is in the Cape Cod area. I mean, he was indeed cremated, and his ashes were scattered in Colorado. Now, as far as this, though, I mean, like I said, that's a very awkward way of phrasing things. But this ties into some of the other reasons why people suspect Bill McReynolds for being a suspect in the murder of JonBenet. They state that he has this odd relationship with his children, which he just said he was closer to JonBenet than he was to his own children. And in the 1970s, his own daughter was abducted, and his daughter's friend was also abducted. And this should have been in approximately 1974, and she was taken to a place where she was held captive, and his daughter was forced to watch the molestation of the other girl who had been abducted. And then 2 years after that, his wife wrote a play, a stage play, and she wrote about a story of someone who was tied up and murdered and tortured in a basement. And it was actually very well received. She even won a grant award for the stage play, but it was never produced. And she also decided not to share the script of the play with the media, which I can understand, actually. I mean, they don't want people hyper-analyzing this, or they just want to keep the spotlight off of them. Whether you're guilty or you're innocent, you're not going to do something like that. But I also have to admit, I'm extremely curious about the contents of that stage play. All we really can gather is that it involves a torture scene in the basement, and JonBenet was found in the basement of her Boulder, Colorado home. She was tied up. She had restraints on her wrists. She had been strangled with the garrote, and duct tape had been placed over her mouth. But there is another article that was written about Bill McReynolds that is from the Associated Press and the Daily Camera, and this is one that was updated recently, but it came out actually came out a couple decades ago. Boulder police are rechecking information from a local man who played Santa Claus at the home of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey 2 nights before she was murdered, and his wife. And his wife was named Janet McReynolds. Boulder investigators interviewed Bill McReynolds, age 67, a former University of Colorado journalism professor, and his wife Janet, age 64, on February 7th, after they returned from a trip to Spain. And this is something that I was talking about last week on the segment, where one reason why people were suspecting Bill McReynolds as a suspect was because after the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, he apparently left the country and went to Spain. Maybe that was a planned holiday. I mean, it's, the winter time, escaping the winters of Colorado to go to Spain. But he returns on February 7th. And the Rocky Mountain News reported that police re-interviewed the McReynoldses and collected hair and handwriting samples from each of them. The news said that the police were interested in the McReynolds because of 2 parallels to the Ramsey slaying. One is the fact that the McReynolds' middle daughter, then 9 years old, was abducted along with a friend in Longmont, and that she witnessed a sexual assault. The incident occurred in 1974, and no suspects were ever mentioned. Now, this Daily Camera article actually does give a date, December 26 of 1974. And JonBenet was found murdered in her basement of her parents' home 22 years later on that exact day. Another parallel is that Janet McReynolds wrote the play, which was titled Hey Rube, about the sexual assault and torture of a girl who was found in a basement. And this is something that I think is very odd Now, was this something that Janet McReynolds was doing to compartmentalize her trauma, to deal with the traumatic experience of having her daughter abducted? But if their daughter has been abducted and has gone through this horrific event for a 9-year-old to watch her friend being molested by captors, and then 2 years later her mother writes a stage play about that particular subject, we're not talking about something like John Ramsey's The Other Side of Suffering, which people might have comments on. But they're talking about not a book that is going to deal with trauma and grief and how to improve one's mental state or something. A stage play that is depicting the acts. 2 years after her daughter witnessed this stuff, she turns it into a piece of fiction. I don't really think that that is the healthiest way of dealing with this. For the sake of her daughter, I mean, for the sake of the person who had to witness all of these things, now people are going to be creative, and usually I'm on the side of free expression, which legally I am. I mean, that's not against the law to write a stage play that would involve certain elements from someone's own life, even if it's related to something that her daughter would have experienced. But JonBenet's experiences also do sound very similar to that, and I will admit that that is a point. Now, this play, Hey Rube, is something that does not seem to have been shared very publicly. Janet McReynolds went with her husband to the Ramsey house on the night of December 26, when Bill McReynolds portrayed Santa at a Christmas party. Oh, did I say December 26? No, this article says December 23rd. I've done that more than once on the channel because there were multiple Christmas parties, and they went to a party at the Whites on December 25th. The Ramsey's party was on December 23rd, so Bill McReynolds was in the house 2 days before when Bill McReynolds portrayed Santa on December 23rd at the party. Bill McReynolds was given a tour of the Ramsey's home, which was almost 7,000 square feet. The McReynoldses told police that their alibi for the night of JonBenet's murder was that they went to bed at 8 p.m., and JonBenet died sometime between her bedtime Christmas night and dawn the following day. Now, that would be the McReynolds going to bed at 8 p.m. JonBenet would have gone to bed considerably later because she was at the party with the Whites. Reportedly, she fell asleep in the car, and John Ramsey was carrying her, and then they put her to bed. And that, more or less, John says that he was playing with a toy set that Burke had for a while, and then they went to bed too, and there's just everybody is in bed, and no one knew anything until Patsy Ramsey woke up and found the ransom note the next day. That is more or less the story that the Ramseys have been sharing. But as far as some other points that have been brought up, I think that it's now time that we look at the challenges against Bill McReynolds as a suspect in JonBenet's murder, because some of you guys were very keen to point things out in the comment section. There's also a lot of discussion on forums online, and some people thought that Bill McReynolds would have been too old to have committed this crime. Bill McReynolds would have been born in 1930. He was born in 1930 on February 8th of that year, so he would have been 66 years old, approaching his 67th birthday. I don't necessarily think that that is too old by itself. However, Bill McReynolds was also somebody who had heart surgery earlier that year, just months prior. People just say he was recovering from heart surgery, which I expect that he would have been, but let's be clear, you heard very clearly in the first article that that was in the summer of 1996, and JonBenet was murdered in the winter of 1996. So we're dealing with at least 4 or 5 months after he had heart surgery, but that is still something that is very, very widely discussed with Bill McReynolds as a suspect. And I have to give a shout out to Silverstuff, who left a comment on last week's episode when Silverstuff said that, now if this guy were to have abducted JonBenet Ramsey and brought her into the basement, that would be the same as Chewbacca abducting JonBenet and bringing her to the basement. There should have been all types of hair and fibers left behind from his Santa costume, which, again, in the theory involving Bill McReynolds, he would have been in his Santa attire to abduct her down. That's how he would have gained her trust, as well as his beard, leaving hairs behind. And some of you might be wondering, well, you've already said multiple times that he was in the house prior to December 26th. December 23rd is the Christmas party. He had been given a tour of the house. anything about his hair and fibers being found in the kitchen, the living room, upstairs, downstairs, JonBenet's room, all of that could be accounted for by just simply being at the Christmas party 3 days earlier. But being found on her body in the basement, I mean, the crime scene was heavily contaminated, but I totally see the point. Someone like him probably would have left behind more evidence if he was committing the crime in a Santa costume, as opposed to a stealthier cat burglar style set of attire that some people believe that the intruder would have worn. Now, also, people have brought this up when they've said that it really begs the question of how did he get in and how did he get out? If Bill McReynolds is your suspect, I highly doubt he would have been doing Lou Smith's breaking in through the window measure, because he just would not have been in the shape to have done that. And then also, I mean, this is something that I'm going to talk about in the later part of the episode, but there were reportedly 20 copies of the Ramsey's family house keys that had been made, 20 copies, and only 17 of them had been accounted for. Could he not have had the key to enter the house? Could the door not have been unlocked? Did he not make an arrangement with JonBenet and say, Santa's going to come visit you after Christmas, not really on Christmas morning, but after Christmas morning on the Christmas night, so leave the door unlocked, set something up like that? And when I interviewed Dr. Casbah, who talked about his theory involving JonBenet Ramsey and Bill McReynolds, I think that that's what he was going at, that he entered through the front door, removed his shoes, went into the basement, or went around the house actually, and simply made the items because it was a specific target, and JonBenet was someone that he had zoned in on. And Dr. Casbah also talked about some numerical signatures involving dates that would be relevant to Bill McReynolds, and I invite everybody to look at my episode from last week, The Murder of JonBenet, Suspect Bill McReynolds. You can find that here on this channel. One more time, hit the like button and subscribe. But we also have to remember that Bill McReynolds was heavily investigated, and he was cleared as a suspect, and his wife, Janet McReynolds, openly stated that he loved playing Santa. Out of all the things that he did, he loved playing Santa the most, and this, of course, greatly affected his life. But in this episode, I'm going to be talking about several different subjects. I'm going to be talking about several different sources that are relevant to the JonBenet Ramsey case. But first, I want to conclude the Bill McReynolds segment by playing something from Dr. Casbah's interview with me, and he is the first person that I have heard share this, and it relates to the ransom note. The 2.5-page ransom note was left behind, and it said Victory SBTC. To this day, no one has conclusively identified the meaning of these letters, SBTC. And what Dr. Casbah is going to share in this clip is his explanation for how Bill McReynolds was able to compose this. Again, his suspect in the murder of JonBenet is Bill McReynolds, and that Bill McReynolds not only played Santa at the Ramsey's Christmas party, he also did this at the mall. And like any other occupation, this is a job. Lots of jobs and occupations have associations, clubs, organizations. And one thing that Dr. Casbah has found is that in the International Santa Club, the way they use codes and trade names is that it's your first initial with Santa. Santa actually comes first, then your first initial, then the state that you were born and the state that you are working. So Bill McReynolds was born in Texas, so his Santa code would be Santa, Bill, Texas, Colorado. JonBenet was murdered in Colorado. Bill McReynolds worked in Colorado. SBTC, Santa, Bill, Texas, Colorado. That would be a way of hiding in plain sight, confessing to the crime and admitting that he did it without actually saying that he did it, and leaving behind a type of criminal signature. So I'm going to play this little clip from Dr. Casbah where he is going to talk about that, and if anything, that is, a very interesting find on his part, and I invite all of you to give your feedback in the comment section down below, and please stick around to the end, because I'm going to talk about some other sources relevant to the JonBenet Ramsey case. Okay, though, so can you verify that his Santa Claus registration name was SBTC, Santa, Bill, Texas, Colorado? Can you verify that, or is that just something you have deduced on your own?
No, there's a real Santa Claus club. There's actually like 5 or 6 now. When I worked for Santa Claus, it was in 2001. The international famous Santa Claus opened up the mall for me, and he was like telling me about this club and his nickname and this and that. And NORA programs told me, no, he's the top Santa of the year. And I was like, there's a Santa Club? And my Santa Claus, after 1 year, went to it, and he got his nickname. He was Santa Burt, Florida. New York, Florida, SBNF. And he got one of the awards as being like the third recognized Santa Claus. It's a real club. I don't know what the names are now. They may have changed it over the years. It's been 20-something years. But that's his name. He likes to use his name in his crimes. Names, dates, and places are important.
And
Christmas. He's Santa Claus. He has to kill on Christmas.
Would there be any...
He's reenacting Nosferatu.
Excuse me for that. I thought you were finished. Sorry. But are there any other clues in the ransom note that would point to your suspect, Bill McReynolds?
Yes. He starts it off with, we are a group of individuals, we. So he's making it sound plural. And more than one person involved. But then, later on in the letter, he says, I. He talks about himself narcissistically. And I don't remember exactly where that was, because it's a long letter. He also used that in several other cases. The we, and then I, on writings. He does that on purpose. And then he also wrote another letter that was posted around town. Somebody somewhere, blah, 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 knows what happened to JonBenet. It's third person. He's talking about JonBenet and how she was left in a moldy room. That's a killer note taunting afterwards. He uses plural, multiple people in it, and then he uses one person in that note too. Just like all his other killings that he uses notes. We, and then he ends with I somewhere.
Now, I don't have the ransom note in front of me. Is the part where it says I, is that if I monitor you getting the money early, I will contact you? Is that it? I'm going to have to go back and double check it. Yes. It starts out by saying we represent a small foreign faction, and then it switches to I later on. Okay, though,
and then the 2 men outside are watching you, but why would he be watching you if they're watching you? Okay, so he's saying we, then 2 men, then himself. That's in writing, that is something an author would use for a big book, for a horror novel or a movie script. He's enjoying that script. That ransom note was going to be famous. That's his signature. And that leads me to other signature notes that he wrote in other cases. That's how, and they match the dates. That's how I got it, all by habits, not because he was a suspect and he had a heart attack and they took his blood. He didn't use his DNA.
And once again, I would like to thank Dr. Casbah for appearing on Black Box Online Radio and asking all of you guys to give your feedback about Bill McReynolds as a suspect. What makes sense to you? What doesn't make sense to you? I would love to hear. Now, there are a lot of resources out there that are relevant to the JonBenet Ramsey case, but I think one of the most famous and widely discussed resources is Burke Ramsey's appearance on the Dr. Phil show, which was done for the 20th anniversary. Maybe it feels like yesterday because I revisit that one so much, but over the weekend, I decided to rewatch the Burke Ramsey interview, and overall, we all know what to expect. Burke is just going to be laughing and smiling the whole time, and he's also not really going to have some very strong and convincing answers. But the thing that stands out the most to me is something that I was told to pay attention to from Crime Junkie. When Crime Junkie conducted their interview with John Ramsey, the host of the program asked him if he had a comment about Burke sneaking downstairs after everyone went to bed. And John Ramsey just simply says that he had no recollection of that. He is rather dumbfounded, deer in the headlights. What? I didn't know that. But Burke stated very clearly in the Dr. Phil interview that everybody went to sleep, including JonBenet, and then he went downstairs by himself. He snuck downstairs, he said, and he said he was playing with a type of toy set and trying to put it together. Now, John Ramsey said he knew exactly which toy set he was talking about, that they had worked on it together themselves, But I don't know. I don't know. Is this something that's like a giant red flag in the entire story? And I also think that this would be an opportune time for Burke to have made the pineapple with milk and the glass of tea that were found on the table. Now, that's mostly where I would want to leave it at that. I just want to ask you guys some very, very direct questions, and this is getting away from Bill McReynolds as a suspect, but you can incorporate him into this theory or these sets of observations. Who made the pineapple and milk? Who made the glass of tea that were found on the table? I think that the easiest explanation and the simplest explanation is that Burke did it, for everything that I just told you. Burke says that he came downstairs by himself, and when Patsy Ramsey was interviewed, and they showed her the photo of the pineapple, she said, "I didn't do this. I wouldn't do this setup." And when I first watched that, I thought it was one of the strangest and most bizarre things that I had ever heard. When somebody's like, "I wouldn't do this setup," I'm like, what are you talking about? This setup? It's a bowl and a spoon. But what she was saying is that she wouldn't put a spoon that large and that long for a bowl of that size. Well, who would do something like that? A 9-year-old. Somebody like Burke, 9, 10. I mean, I would probably even do it myself right now, and I'm 37 years old, because things like that don't really bother me. But to somebody like Patsy Ramsey, she could easily be telling the truth. But if anything, that would just suggest that Burke did it. Also, Patsy and Burke's fingerprints are on the bowl, and not JonBenet, yet JonBenet had undigested pineapple in her stomach, or I shouldn't say that. The first time I heard about the pineapple is that it was actually in her small intestine, but I'm not even going to make this whole episode about the pineapple. I'm talking more about the bowl, actually, and who set this thing up. I think that Burke is the most likely culprit in that one. That doesn't mean that he killed her. That doesn't mean that he killed JonBenet, but I think he was the source of that. I also think it's very bizarre that he didn't just say that that's a bowl of pineapple when they showed it to him in the interrogation. He's looking at it like it's some type of asteroid from some other galaxy or something like that, and he has no idea what it is. It's a bowl of fruit. But people are also wondering, why are Patsy's fingerprints on the bowl if she didn't prepare it? And she says she didn't prepare it, and Burke was downstairs by himself. By his own admission, he did it by himself. There was no one else around. And I think it doesn't surprise me at all that Patsy's fingerprints are on the bowl. It was her house. Some people are like, well, if it had come out of a dishwasher or it was on a drying rack, should that really have her fingerprints? It was her house. If you were to go to my kitchen, you would probably find my fingerprints on lots of things. I'm not surprised at all that a bowl that was found in her house had her fingerprints on it. But as I've said, I believe her when she said that she didn't put the pineapple and milk on the table. This seems like something that Burke did by himself and went back upstairs. That means to anybody who is entertaining the idea that there was an intruder who entered the house when the Ramseys were at the Christmas party. I mean, I entertained the intruder theory for a very long time, and I openly said the intruder would have probably been in the house for 1 to 4 hours. Well, if they entered when the Ramseys were at the Christmas party, and they waited for everybody to go to sleep, and for Burke to go upstairs and downstairs, that 4 hours could easily turn into 5 or 6 hours for all of that time to have occurred. I mean, it could have been 2 hours, it could have been 6 hours. It's very hard to say. And as I told you, throughout this series, I started out by being somebody who was absolutely giving my seal of approval for the intruder theory, and then I ultimately had to go to undetermined because I stepped down from the intruder theory because there are complications like that. Now, somebody like Dr. Casbah, of course, thinks that Bill McReynolds was responsible for JonBenet's murder, and I would count him as an intruder. I would list him as somebody who would have been in the intruder category. When I say intruder, I just mean anybody that was not John, Patsy, or Burke, including other people like, say, John Andrew Ramsey. I would count him as an intruder, even though he had his own room in the house. He wasn't supposed to be there that night. I absolutely do not think that John Andrew Ramsey was the culprit. That's just an example. Now, a lot of people took exception to something that Dr. Casbah had said in the previous interview that came out last week, and that was that he was sharing some info about how he believed that Burke and JonBenet both saw Santa Claus, Bill McReynolds in his Santa costume, downstairs, and that Burke went back upstairs, and the way that he processed it was that he saw Santa, and if he told his parents about it, they wouldn't have believed it because they don't believe or acknowledge the existence of a real Santa Claus. And a lot of you guys were just saying that you thought that that was an implausible statement. And I have a lot of trouble accepting that. I have a lot of trouble accepting that Burke, at 9 years old, would have seen a man in his kitchen or living room dressed as Santa and not said anything, given the severity of the situation. I mean, we're just talking about one sentence, such as, there was a man here last night, he was wearing a Santa costume, and Burke should have identified him because he had played Santa at the Christmas parties multiple times. Alright, so that's one thing. Now, I want to move on to a different subject here, and this is once again a challenge question, and this relates to something that is relevant to the bowl, actually. I mean, the first challenge question for this episode is, who left the bowl there? Who left the bowl on the table? Who put the bowl on the table that had the pineapple in it? I've already told you I thought Burke did it. That much. The next one is, I can provide an explanation that will bring a lot of clarity to many different parts of this case, but I'm very undecided on it, and I'm really just sharing this with you guys to know, what do you think about this? Are people underestimating JonBenet's capabilities? JonBenet was 6 years old, and, I mean, a lot of people are making it seem like she didn't know how to eat by herself, she didn't know how to change her own clothes, she didn't know how to clean herself. I mean, I've seen 3-year-olds that know how to change their own shirt. JonBenet was reportedly put to bed in the red turtleneck, and when she was found dead, she was wearing a different shirt and the white knit sweater. So, one explanation that I've thought of is just JonBenet did it herself. I mean, she woke up, and then she put on different clothes. That's why the turtleneck was balled up, left on the bathroom sink, but not wet, mind you. JonBenet went downstairs by herself. She ate some of the pineapple with her bare hands without touching the edge of the bowl. Maybe she went back upstairs. Maybe she didn't. Almost everybody who seems to support the intruder theory states that they think that she was in her bedroom when she was abducted. And there is some evidence to support this. There was a very odd impression that was found on a rug where it looked like an adult had been sitting down for an extended period of time, long enough for it to last until the investigators got there. That's another point. But, I mean, I'm just really not convinced that JonBenet couldn't do anything by herself, and I think that would provide a lot of explanations, that she changed her shirt, she ate the pineapple by herself. Nobody forced her to do anything in that regard, and then at some point, the killer attacked her. Whether you think it's John Patsy Burke or the intruder, then the killer attacked her. Let me know what you think about all of that. I mean, I understand why people say this stuff. JonBenet was not good at changing her clothes. She had to have the days of the week written on her underwear. And it seems like John and Patsy also said that, Patsy would regularly help her change her clothes. But maybe they're just underestimating the capabilities of 6-year-old JonBenet. And to move on to the next segment here, there is a book out there called Lou and JonBenet by John Wesley Anderson, which is a more or less exploration into the life and career of Lou Smith, a detective who was perhaps the largest believer and proponent of the intruder theory. And in the introduction to this book, there is a statement that is shared by John Wesley Anderson, even though he's interpreting other people's material, and he states that there is something called transfer theory, something that we should keep in mind in regards to all true crime cases, and that is that the killer always brings something with them, leaves something, and takes something. The killer always takes something and leaves something. Transfer theory. With the JonBenet Ramsey case, I think that this is an excellent example of that, for the following reason. There is so much evidence that was left behind from the killer. Whether you think it was Bill McReynolds or you think it was somebody else, there is so much evidence that has been left behind. Somebody handled the bindings. Somebody handled the paintbrush and turned it into the garrote. Somebody put duct tape over her mouth. The high-tech boot print that was found in the basement, which might be less and less relevant to the Ramsey case as we go on. But all of these things point toward somebody who is leaving items behind. Not to mention hairs, fibers that could have been contaminated by the blankets that were used, but the DNA under JonBenet's fingernails, the touch DNA on her underwear and leggings, all of that stuff was left behind. What did the perpetrator take with them? What did the perpetrator take with them in this transfer theory? The head of the paintbrush. Absolutely. The head of the paintbrush and who knows what else. Maybe something from the window. Maybe something from the basement. Maybe the suitcase was a bigger clue than what we originally thought. Recently on the channel, I was talking to you guys about a YouTuber named Call Me Chris, and she was giving her theory about the JonBenet Ramsey case, being very careful with her words, but it seems like she was implicating the Ramseys. And she was absolutely dismissive of all of the evidence related to the window, saying, well, there's a suitcase that's under the window, but we don't know how it got there. It appears that there are some markings on top of the suitcase, but we don't necessarily know what those are. There's a scuff mark on the wall leading up to the window, but we aren't sure what that's from, and I loved it. I was critical of her video, and other people were calling me out in the comment section saying I was being too harsh on her, but I wanted to give her credit for that. I loved that part, for the following reason: skepticism. She's just like, okay, everybody's making a big deal about this suitcase under the window. If we don't know the origin of these marks, how can we say that the intruder left them? All right, bravo, I'll give you that one, Call Me Chris. And as we continue onward, I just have a very small thing here. There is a movie that was aired on Fox TV in the year 2000 called Getting Away with Murder, the JonBenet Ramsey story. And it's available on YouTube for free. It's called a movie, but it was actually about 46 minutes long. It's more like a TV special. And it was one of these dramatizations where people are sharing actual discussions about the true crime case, and they're trying to weigh the merit of the evidence. And I was surprised to see this because about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I saw a completely different JonBenet film that was doing this exact setup. It seems like this is something that has been done multiple times. And no, not Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, although I absolutely love the miniseries for Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. Very, very well put together and engaging. But anyway, in the film Getting Away with Murder, it was heavily criticized for their portrayal of Patsy Ramsey. But I thought their portrayal of Patsy was actually honest, but then they really wanted to zone in on the characteristics that made people suspect Patsy Ramsey in the first place. It's almost the concept of hyperbole, doing something extreme to draw attention to a point. And it's not just flat out saying that Patsy Ramsey killed her daughter. No, not like that at all. But they're highlighting certain aspects of her personality that made people suspicious. But one thing, though, that also was very eye-opening for me from this movie, Getting Away with Murder, is that the intruder theory has not changed at all in, 25 years. This came out in 2000. It's 2025 at the time of this recording. 25 years. The same pieces of evidence are being talked about. I've already gone through some of them with you, but they're saying the 2 palm prints that were found in the basement that were unaccounted for, the scuff mark on the wall, the suitcase positioned under the window, and this was one that said that the Ramseys made the 20 copies of their keys, but only 17 were accounted for. If somebody had obtained that, then they could enter the house on their own. Doors are also regularly left unlocked, the broken window in the basement, all of this stuff. When I did my episodes on the intruder theory, the information has not changed. In 2025, those are the pieces of evidence. When Lou Smith would go on television in, whether it's 98, 2001, or just whatever year it was, always the same pieces of evidence. And, that is really something that I think is very unfortunate, that theory is just not evolving, and it's not dying, it's just staying stagnant. And that's bad. That's absolutely what I don't think anybody wants, for this case to just stay cold and frozen forever. And the final thing that I will leave you with on this episode about JonBenet Ramsey is, I regularly watch videos about psychology on YouTube. I'm fascinated by the subject, and a lot of them relate to psychopaths and sociopaths, psychopathy and sociopathy. And there was a video that came out on the channel SBSK that I watched several years ago, and it was one of the first interviews that I saw with a clinical sociopath, someone with antisocial personality disorder, but he used the term sociopath. And I found a different one last night from a different person who had sociopathy and autism, a combination of these two mental conditions. An autistic sociopath, for simplicity's sake, I'm trying to be as polite as I can with the language, because now some people are saying you should only say antisocial personality disorder, you should only say on the spectrum, but that's how they presented it in the SBSK interview. And she was sharing her experiences as someone who was a sociopath with autism, and she just said, I don't know how to interact. I have to figure it out all the time. And then the interviewer's like, well, how do you do it, though? How do you live your normal life? And she said, I pull things from TV shows, sitcoms, and characters that are similar to me in some way. And I was just thinking instantly about the JonBenet ransom note. Now, I'm not necessarily sure if the person who wrote that was autistic or on the spectrum, but a sociopath, highly likely. The person who killed JonBenet was a sociopath, highly likely, for the following reason. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey was a sociopathic, sadistic, sexual murder, and I really don't think there's too much evidence to the contrary. Definitely a sexual sadist committed this crime, or staged the scene, in your particular theory, but sociopath, highly probable. Not certifiable, but highly probable. And when you look at the ransom note in the JonBenet Ramsey case, it is just filled with movie references. It's just filled with these types of constructions that have been put together. The entire murder of JonBenet Ramsey is similar to a movie called Ransom that came out in 1996. So I think that even though I'm not sure if the person who committed the murder was an autistic sociopath or not, I saw something there that she was talking about where this person didn't necessarily know what to do, so they just started putting things together in their own mind about what made sense to them. And they just started arranging this crime in a way that's just stealing things from other movie references, from movies and perhaps even books or TV shows, maybe a play from 1976, we don't know. But the Zodiac Killer would also be a very clear example of this. They don't know what to do, they don't know what to say, so they're just going to rip off other people's ideas. A big difference between the murderer of JonBenet Ramsey and the Zodiac Killer is, with the Zodiac, we have so many more communications. Letters, phone calls, a car door message, greeting cards, diagrams. And you'll see how the Zodiac really stole things from other creators. It's just that exact concept of somebody who is trying to function and interact in a sociopathic way with no empathy. So what they do is they start pulling things from sources that have been in their life. And I absolutely thought, first of JonBenet Ramsey, second about the Zodiac Killer. Actually, with Jack the Ripper, I don't necessarily think so. I mean, the Jack the Ripper letters contain fewer references like that, but you can hear more about that on Ripper Wednesday tomorrow. Every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper here on BBOR. So ultimately, I think that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that JonBenet was killed by a sociopath. But in this particular SBSK interview, the person who with autism and sociopathy who was being interviewed said very clearly that some people doubt me when I say that I'm a sociopath. Some people doubt me when they say that I'm autistic because they see me laughing and they see me making eye contact and they see me acting like I have emotions. But what they don't understand is that I'm 30 years old. That's her quoting. I'm quoting her, mind you. She says, I'm 30 years old. I've been alive for 30 years. I've learned how to do it. I've learned how to behave in this particular way. And that should be very, very eye-opening. And that should be somewhat scary in a certain sense, because she also said in the interview that 1 out of every 30 people is a sociopath. And we should also use the term psychopath, sociopath. There are a lot of different definitions out there. But Dr. Robert Hare estimated that 1% of the population was psychopathic. Dr. Martha Stout estimates that it was actually 4%. And I actually pulled up my calculator and I was stating, let's see, 1 in 30, what percentage is that? Oh, that's about, 3 point some odd percent, between 3 and 4%. So what this person was saying is that, yes, 1 in 30 people are psychopaths or sociopaths. So if you were at school and you had a class with 30 people in it, there's a high chance that one person in the class was a sociopath. Sociopaths are way more easy to encounter than people would believe. And I think that is just absolutely shocking. But it's not overly shocking. I mean, it's shocking, but it's not beyond belief. Let's put it that way. It's somewhat of a surprise, but it's not an enormous surprise. Think about how many people you've known in your life that could be possible sociopaths. Think about how many people you've known in your life that exhibited some type of sadistic tendency when no one else was around. Did they do something sadistic? And in fact, there are going to be even more narcissists out there. But I really want to come back to this issue with the movie references and just the lack of an identity, so they're ripping people off. That sounded so much like the killer of JonBenet Ramsey. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Started out with a lot of Bill McReynolds stuff, and I really wanted to talk to you guys about these other sources that I had encountered in the JonBenet Ramsey case, and thank you so much for listening. And I'm just going through many different things in all of my episodes of Black Box Online Radio. Out of all the stories that I follow here on BBOR, the Zodiac Killer, D.B. Cooper, Jack the Ripper, and the Black Dahlia, this is the case that I find to be the most frustrating. Number one, it's the most horrifying about what was done to a 6-year-old. And number two, this case should have been solved years ago with the amount of evidence that has been left behind. It is saddening. Well, that's all for me now, and in addition to the regularly scheduled lineup, I also release shorts and reels Monday through Friday here on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. My Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, Instagram blackboxonlineradio, and if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxonlineradio, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. Until next time.